Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Robert Stickle. I'm also joined by my colleague Jim Patterson. Jim will be today's presenter and will be discussing the topic of the essential steps to managing resources in an adaptive project management world. This webinar is a new addition to our diverse library of project and portfolio management videos we have available on YouTube and our website. So if you enjoy this webinar, we welcome you to watch the other videos we have available there. And as always, I hope that today's presentation grants you some insight into the world of project and portfolio management and gets you excited for the new developments happening within the industry and here at OnePlan. Thank you again. I'll now turn the presentation over to Jim.
Thanks, Robert, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. You know, the management of resources and how well we do that in organizations is a continuing pain point and challenge, maybe even heightened more so in this day and age where good resources may be hard to find in the marketplace and we have to do more with less. Irrespective of all that, there are essential steps to managing resources. And in this, what they're calling an adaptive project management world today, it becomes more multidimensional and more things to consider and things coming from a variety of different angles. So let's get into and talk about it a little bit. You know, the kind of 101 definition of what resource management is. It's the efficient and effective deployment and allocation of an organization's resources when and where they are needed. Fairly self-evident, but for the context of what we're talking about resource management, that's really what we're talking about today. And the benefits of executing good resource management is things like providing good resource visibility so we understand where those resource commitments are and where people are spending their valuable time. Helps us increase business value because we get the opportunity through a more structured management process to make sure that our resources are allocated to the things that bring the most value to the business. We also can save time and money because we can hopefully eliminate duplications of effort and become more streamlined on the things that we're working on, such that we're not wasting resources on things that we shouldn't be. And just increase project success rates. Without good resource management, oftentimes people allocate or approve projects semi-blindly without really understanding if we have the wherewithal or the bandwidth to actually fulfill on those projects. The other thing is to be able to accommodate demand. If we understand where we're at any given point in time with our resource loads and our resource demands, we can determine realistically whether or not we can realistically take on something new, or if there's a trade-off that has to happen where something that we're already doing may have to be paused or canceled in order to take on something with more value. And just overall employee satisfaction. If we don't do this well, we tend to overload and burn out our resources, which can reduce productivity, but in the worst case can lead to frustration where we actually lose people because they're just too overworked. So these are some of the benefits with good resource management that we can help achieve and overcome. Now, typical resource management challenges that we see in organizations, one is resource ownership. In a more matrixed organization, the resources may be managed or owned by particular organizations or departments that have to allocate those resources to the projects or the initiatives. And the project managers or scrum masters might have to request those resources to be allocated to them. So the challenge might be, how do we efficiently go through that process where projects ask for and demand resources and functional organizations provide those resources with the right skills at the right time? Resource focus. Because we have so much work coming in organizations today from different angles, different types of work, project work, non-project work, operational work, unplanned work. Sometimes the focus and prioritization of what should be tackled first and what should be tackled next isn't always clear to the resources at hand. Non-project workload. Oftentimes we focus on the projects that are coming in and we say yes to those or evaluate whether to say yes to those, and maybe don't properly factor in the non-project workload, whether it be administrative or operations and support, the types of things that might be level of effort and the type of resource that you are in an organization and the type of role that you play may dictate something completely different. An operational resource might be 80% allocated to operations and support and only maybe 20% allocated to projects, where a more project-oriented or development resource might be the exact opposite, the 80-20 the other way. Resource tracking. It's one thing to be able to forecast and plan where our resources are going to be and how much we've committed, but tracking where people are actually spending their time. Just because you say somebody's going to be on a project this coming Monday doesn't mean they're going to show up and actually be on that project if they've got other projects that haven't finished yet. So tracking where people are actually spending their time and making adjustments to our plans according to what's happening in reality on the ground is important in resource tracking. Resource visibility. Oftentimes, because resources are working on a variety of different things, maybe in a variety of different portfolios for different parts of the organization, oftentimes there's not a comprehensive view of the full picture of what everybody's working on, and not understanding where we might have underutilization or overutilization of resources. And resource reporting, having to either cobble it together manually in spreadsheets or mash up data from a variety of sources for reporting. Sometimes without having a comprehensive or a cohesive resource management approach, it's hard to bring that resource reporting together as a more automated and as a normal output of the process. And then too much information. Resource information is not only about, line items of information, but time phasing of information. So if you think about cell by cell time phasing, day by day, week by week, month by month, and the different nature of the works that we have, sometimes we can end up with an eye chart of information that's just too much to consume. Too much data, but maybe not in a useful form for decision support and analysis. So too much information has to be boiled down and put into a context so we can use it as good decision support information. Now, from a resource management approach and the steps in that, where should people start? When using the metaphor here of stepping stones, and on the far left, resource capacity is a place to start. One is understanding the resources that we have at hand, but then also maybe assigning them at a very high level, maybe even by a role, and saying that we need a developer, a business analyst, a scientist, whatever it might be, for so many FTEs over a certain month or certain percentage of their effort, and be able to just allocate, or just, I should say, just plan at that level of detail very early on so that we can understand what we have and at a high level what we think we're going to need. Now, resource allocation really gets down to allocating specific resources to individual efforts or projects or initiatives, and understanding, potentially at a named individual level, how we're going to allocate those resources on which projects, on which tasks, etc. And the idea there is to take that high level resource capacity plan and kind of get it down to another level of detail and another level of granularity. Then there's resource work management. And this is where we get outside of just projects. This is where we focus in on all the work a resource has on their plate, as I mentioned before, about maybe operational versus more project and discretionary things, and be able to get that total picture and manage a resource's workload, and have a resource be able to manage effectively the workload that's put onto them and report back status and track on those types of things. Now, especially in the agile efforts that are happening more and more today, team formation and the efficiencies and effectivenesses of those teams is really about growing and getting better as a team and becoming more effective, increasing things like velocities. And that team formation and having a more team prospect or approach helps us get better in working as a unit in delivering things that we're very familiar with. And then ultimately, if we do all those things well, the incremental growth that can happen is in the areas of personal productivity, as people end up getting more clarity on their resourcing, more reasonable workloads, and then be able to be empowered to make some decisions on how they're going to do things. That personal productivity can go up as a result of good resource management. Now, resource management maturity dimensions. Not every organization is ready to tackle these things at the same level of rigor. We have to determine, do we want to track resources at a role level or maybe at an individual named resource level? Is it good enough for us to plan and just forecast on a role basis, as we know we have so many of these business analysts or developers or whatever it might be? And in that capacity planning early stage, from a resource management perspective, this may be the level of granularity that's appropriate for somebody that's just embarking upon structured resource management. Now, planning and tracking granularity Is this something you want to do at a project level, at a percentage of allocation or FTE? Or do we really need to get down to work items? And do we need to track resources assigned over time to specific tasks of work? The needs of different organizations may dictate that. What also might dictate that from a maturity perspective is we might not have the wherewithal yet to get good, accurate information at a granular task level across the board, across everybody in our organization. Might drive us to stay at a higher level until we think we can achieve and sustain that. Approval and negotiation. I mentioned the matrixed organizations. Do we need an approval process formalized where, projects, request resources and resource types, and functional and resource organizations evaluate those things and offer up different resources that people can have so they can accept onto their project? Do we need a full negotiation process built into our resource management? Governance and prioritization. This is about dovetailing this with the whole portfolio management process. As we evaluate projects that are being requested and coming in, as we prioritize those and decide what we're going to work on and what may align in the best interests of the organization, we may want to determine whether or not we need to align this resource management process with this governance and prioritization process. Forecasting versus actuals. Some organizations, when they embark upon resource management early on, just forecast. They say, right, for now, all we want to do is look ahead. We can't do anything about yesterday. So let's just keep forecasting on a rolling basis and determine what our needs are so we can at least be ready and make decisions based upon what we have and what we think it's going to take to deliver what we have on our plate. Other folks want to capture actuals and compare them and see where we actually spent our time and actually do look back and compare it to what our original forecasts are, and maybe mature by changing our planning and forecast assumptions based upon history and the actuals that we glean them from. And then there's resource costs. Some organizations want to get to the point where they understand what those labor costs are and rolling them up with rates associated with those resources, and possibly even to take it to another level where they might be charging back to other organizations internally or billing clients externally. All of these things are dimensions to consider, and also be realistic with ourselves of where we're at when we're starting this process and how much of this we can tackle now versus what's aspirational as we go through and build a roadmap to get to full maturity. Now, there is a top-down and bottoms-up process. For example, from a top-down perspective, we talked about that resource allocation, capacity plan at a high level at maybe just the project level, and be able to, build that capacity plan high level with maybe even generic roles. But then eventually you might have schedules and work plans and backlogs that have resources allocated to them. And from the bottom up, they're rolling up from those task or work item levels to a total demand or for those resources that we're going to work on. Now, a mature organization might likely be doing both of those things. And at a certain point, when you have more detail, that may be what you look at. But then you want to reconcile that or compare that with what your top-down assumptions were earlier on, and make adjustments based upon the fact that we're doing it differently on a different time phase than we thought earlier on. Now, resource management doesn't stand alone in a vacuum. A resource management process identified down below in the light blue, about identifying your generic roles and determine how many of each you have, and then identifying who your most constraining resources and people are that we most have to worry about. And then time sequencing of projects. Where does that come from? Well, in the gray, we're looking at, we have ideas and requests and project requests that we evaluate, maybe do business cases for, and then get proposed as portfolios. Well, at that point, they're probably going to intersect to where people are going to ask, do we have the resources to do this? Or do we have resources working on other things that we might be able to allocate to those types of things? So to move past that intersection point, we have to match that high level demand to the supply that we have. And that needs to be factored in by the decision makers, whether it be our steering committees or whoever is approving our portfolio. And then at that point, when those projects actually get approved, we have to request specific resource allocations to fill them with real individuals, not just generic resources. So they have to work together. Now, in understanding resource capacity in its simplest terms, the capacity is how many people or resources do we have that can work on projects, and for how much time are they available? And that could be on an ongoing basis. I'm only available, 50% of my time for projects, for example. And what roles can they play? Because not everybody's necessarily interchangeable in the things that they can do. Now, the demand is really determining the resources required for each of the projects that you're doing or that you propose doing, and then prioritizing those projects like we mentioned, and then allocate resources based on role and priority until they're used up or exhausted. And the idea there is to then try to match your capacity with demand so you don't have underutilized and idle resources, but you don't over allocate to a degree that it's harmful. Now, as we mature, we want to develop projects based upon committed availability such that we have visibility and we know that when we commit it, that it's something that we actually can put resources to and actually deliver. And the other part would be time it as such so you don't start projects if resources aren't available. And perhaps maybe your answer is, yes, we want to do this, but we can't do it till next month. We can't do it till next quarter. The idea is to understand that and be able to balance that on a rolling and ongoing basis. Now, today, how are many people doing this? Many people are just using Excel today. And why? Because it's freely available. People basically know how to use it. And they may be unaware of alternatives, but people build very complex models in Excel to try to do some of this stuff in a standalone way with just the resource dimension. But the problem with it is there's often lack of standards across an organization. It's a very manual and static model that when things change or projects get pushed, it's a cell by cell, row by row, painstaking type of process. And it's fragile. It's easy to break formulas and calculations in a spreadsheet. And there's no dynamic visibility of resource capacity as you take on resources and people get hired and those types of things. It can be very time consuming when things change. And worst off, it's not connected to anything else you're going to do with project execution, with your schedules and your portfolio and those types of things. And then just getting comprehensive overall reporting outside the context of that individual spreadsheet is often difficult, let alone strategic alignment of your projects to making sure you're allocating the resources to the right strategies and the right things that the organization wants, and they're going to provide the highest value. So in this day of cloud tools, Excel is still used in a lot of organizations, but with the easy access of cloud tools, agile tools, and different methods people are using, waterfall and agile and things, it's driving a proliferation of tools across organizations, meaning it's compounding this problem of trying to get a comprehensive view together of everything. In this diagram, which we actually gleaned from working with a particular client, genericized it some, but you look down the left and you look at the different functions that are being performed, demand management, portfolio management, project management, and you look at the different parts of the organizations or departments that are actually using different tool sets. Imagine trying to get a comprehensive resource capacity plan view across all of that with all those different tool sets being used. It's not very easy. It's a very heavy manual intensive mashup of data. And the move towards Agile today is actually adding another dimension to resource management. The analysts say that we're moving to the left if you look at this diagram, where people are trying to become more agile. If you see agile portfolio management over on the left-hand side here, and moving from maybe more traditional project portfolio management, which was maybe more waterfall oriented that you see in the green on the right. Now, as people strive to become more agile, some will get all the way over there, but the analysts are finding that's the minority of the cases. Many of them, it's going to take them years to fully get agile on everything that they manage. On the other hand, if they do, it's a multi-year journey to get there. And whether or not they're in transit to that or where they're going to end up fully, what most people see happening is they end up in this adaptive portfolio management area where they're doing some blend. Some types of projects are better off for them doing in a more waterfall or hybrid fashion. Some projects are, like software development projects or some product development projects may be better off being done via an agile framework or an agile approach. The key is that we're going to talk about OnePlan today, and that it actually is designed to support you wherever you're at on this spectrum, whenever you get to that point of that spectrum. So with Agile, it doesn't diminish or replace the need to do resource management. Even with Agile approaches, and even if you have dedicated teams, most organizations still have scarce enterprise resources that need to be judiciously allocated and tracked. And in this case, it's no less important just because you're operating in teams and you're working in sprints and doing scrums. You still have to be able to bring this together and understand what our capacity and demand is. And still have to consider all work types, because just because you're on a dedicated Agile team does not mean you don't have routine work that you have to do off to the side. It doesn't mean you don't get unscheduled things that come up where you have administrative and support types of things that have to happen. The key is that we need to balance these things regardless of what the execution methodology or framework is. And it has to be a rolling process. We can't just put a resource plan on a grid and say, this is our resource plan. The situation on the ground changes constantly. And near term, in this diagram from Gartner, like your near term, say Q1 capacity by role type, you may have it by work type and down to actual team utilization and some more granular type of information because it's more near term. And maybe higher level as you go out to future quarters, but as you get closer to those quarters, you're going to drill that down into the more requisite detail that you're going to need to build a good resource plan, just like you have in Q1 here. So ultimately, you want a solution that's not a spreadsheet, something that's a transformative solution that's got a modern UI, central database storage, processes embedded into it. It gives you actionable intelligence and gives you the ability to align with strategies to make sure we're actually assigning resources to the right things. And even scenario modeling so that we can look at alternatives when changes happen, things that we have to face and adjust to, and really have ease of updating change as we go through. And OnePlan is designed to do that. OnePlan is designed to connect you all the way from strategy down to execution. Whether it be the portfolio planning of the portfolio of projects themselves, the resource capacity or resource planning, the financial planning around that, which may be a derivative of the resource plan, and the execution pieces from the bottom up that you may do for more of that bottom up resource allocation we talked about, whether it be waterfall work plans, agile backlogs and sprint plans, and consistent status reporting across all that so we can understand where we stand at any given point in time. Now, I've alluded to the strategy piece, and this is becoming more and more important. The analysts are saying we're moving into the age where project and portfolio management, PPM, is evolving into SPM, or strategic portfolio management. And that means we have to have a strategy in the first place. And OnePlan is designed to provide you a place where you can actually elaborate on your strategic plan, your objectives and your key results, the tangible measures of whether or not we're going to get to those, and have a strategic plan that leadership can execute on. But for the purposes of resource management, we can actually also in OnePlan do the operational or execution portfolio in there, including those resource plans, and make sure that we align ourselves with that strategic plan, making sure that the things that we're working on contribute to what the organization and what leadership wants to do from a strategic perspective, and ensure that resources are allocated to initiatives that are high value and strategically aligned. We can do that providing on a project by project basis, individual resource plans that gives us time phased resource estimates, whether it be generic or named individuals. And we can do this early on from when it's an idea or a request all the way through the finish of its execution. We can plan in full-time equivalents or percentages of allocation or hours, and look at the existing demand and commitments as you're planning to make sure we know what's already on the plate before we even give somebody another piece of work to do. There's the resource capacity planning organization-wide, meaning that you can roll this up and look at a complete organizational plan that allows us to look at what resources are going to be required across the entire spectrum of all the projects and work that we've got. And then be able to do portfolio analysis, some what-if capabilities that allow us to analyze, given a set of projects that we're doing and the timing of those, what's it going to take, and are we in the red? Can we not deliver based upon severe over allocations on those things? And do we need to make adjustments on what we're selecting? And those things can roll into financial planning, meaning resources can have costs associated with them that can then translate into labor budgets that allow us to look at maybe our budget for resources versus our actuals or our revised forecasts. And then having the reporting as a natural output. OnePlan leverages Power BI, and we have a native feed to a pack of reports that you can use ours or your own to use that data to get on-demand information, to look at where things are, who's over allocated, what the demands are, how we're doing from a resource perspective, in addition to just being able to look at this information in OnePlan itself. So with that, I will go to a demonstration. And here we're looking at a portfolio in OnePlan. And in this portfolio, I'm just looking at a flat list of projects and epics. that might be worked on in an organization. This is more of a KPI view, but we can have different list views with different columns of data and different KPIs. We can have board views that allow us to work with it in a more agile fashion, and even roadmap views of the portfolio to look at them in different ways. But there's tools in here for the different perspectives or personas. There's tools in here for the portfolio managers, for the project managers, and for the resource managers and others that may participate in here. So starting here in the portfolio, just since this is a webinar about resource management, if I went in here and just wanted to look at an effort summary, a quick view of how we're doing on an effort perspective on our different projects would tell us maybe what we've planned, what we've actually spent on those projects to date, how much remaining effort there are, and even things like our progress. And the key here was that we'd be able to, keep our finger on the pulse at a high level of what the resource situation is here and what our burn is on those particular things. We can even look at some of these things by business unit. So if I collapse this view is actually grouped by business unit, where I can roll up the efforts and look at how much effort we're using or actually using or planning to use across different departments. IT has a lot of projects that's consuming resources. Maybe product development has fewer projects and consuming those resources. But very quick ways to look at this at a portfolio summary level. You could also look at this from an agile perspective. If you want to look at different boards and such, I could come in here and say, just look at a board and say, what is the mix of things that we have here? So for example, I can look at what things are on which stage of the life cycle of a project. I can have different pieces of information on the different cards. For example, I could even add something like, committed effort to the card, to actually look and see what the committed effort is on each of these. And in this case, I'm rolling up counts of how many projects I have in each stage, but I could also roll those up by, say, committed effort if I wanted to, and look at what the totals are. And I can even set limits in here that would let me see whether or not the hours in each of these stages basically exceed any particular limit I might set. You could see that from a cost perspective. If I looked here in a maybe different view, I could look and see what we call constraints in here, and look at we can set constraints to let it know whether or not we're exceeding any of those targets by the roll-ups that are in here. Now, if I go to drill into a specific project, let me go back to the portfolio again in the list view. If I drill into a specific project, the things that are available to me in a particular project, one of the things is an overall resource plan, or a work plan. So for example, I can do the bottoms up piece if we want to. In this particular case, if I go to look at say a schedule view from a more of a waterfall schedule perspective, and let's say open this up, notice that I have a view from a planning perspective where I got planned effort and I've got different resources assigned to these that are allocated. Or I might have, just like at the portfolio level, maybe a more effort focused type of view in here that basically would have a combination of both the planned effort, remaining effort, and maybe actuals or timesheet hours that have come in against that I can view that roll up to the entire project. I might also have in here, I might also have a backlog for an agile project, and that agile project, might be structured in a backlog in different sets of sprints, and it might be tied even to an agile tool that you have. It might be bringing in data from a JIRA or an Azure DevOps, like that we have connectors for, and you can connect to the plans to bring that data in. But here, for example, if you're tracking hours or story points in those type of areas, you can bring those in from the Agile tool or plan it right here in OnePlan if you want to, along with the sprint planning and associating these with the sprints that you would like to have. And once again, just like with the backlog, in the schedule work type that we talked about, you can come in here and look at different tools that you might want to connect your particular work plan to. In this case, we have connectors enabled for this particular environment for Project for the Web from Microsoft Planner, and the traditional Microsoft Project Professional. In this case, we're doing this all directly in OnePlan. Now, what's also in here, so you can think about this, the dates and durations on these tasks and the resources that are assigned can roll up to a more bottoms-up type of resource plan. On the resource planning side of things, we talked about top-down versus bottom-up. So in this case, the resource plan for this particular project, The committed is really that top-down plan I talked about. Like long before we have a schedule, we can actually build generically. Say I need a project manager, 20 hours a month for 3 months, or I need Joe, these number of hours across these different months. And I can choose to plan and toggle in here in either hours or percentages of allocation, however I choose to plan on that. And it actually works like a spreadsheet, but it's also giving me some highlights here, telling me that what I've got Joe working on with what else he's got going, he's over allocated in these periods. So he might be at risk of not being able to perform at these particular times, right? So in this particular case, I'm looking at a mix of generic and named individuals, but I can also do some reconciliation or viewing even while I'm in the project. Let's say, for example, I wanted to look at alternatives for Joe for this project manager role, or even better, maybe I want to look at, I've got to get a named developer on here for this generic developer assignment that's here. And I can go and either find resources by criteria that I establish for my resources, like by the role specifically, or ask the system to find me a good match. And in this case, for the time that I need a developer, it looks like WoFat may be an alternative for me. And I could actually select Wo, and I could actually say replace resource up above and substitute him. Because what this one's showing down below here is showing me the remaining availability of the resources that I might want to use for these up above. So once again, it's a good way to take a look at that and reconcile some resource, let's just say, constraints that we have at any given point in time. Now, this is, we call committed, which is that top-down capacity plan. Now, from the schedules and the backlogs, if you want to look at this from a bottom-up perspective, we've got a scheduled resource type in here that is really rolling up data from the bottom up. So in this case, for example, I might look at, Gavin and what Gavin's working on in this particular project. And what it's showing me is all the individual tasks that Gavin's on and when his time is required on those particular tasks. So this is rolling up from the bottom to these numbers, giving me a total number in this schedule type for Gavin. I could also go in and there's also a timesheet type if I want to look at actuals as well. But if I go back to the committed, for example, and this was my original assumption, and then I build out a schedule and allocate resources to them, I can actually compare, and I can say, let me compare the committed to the scheduled. And as I look at that, I can come through here and I can look and see that in March, I had committed 10 hours for a project manager, and the schedule saying I'm going to need 17. In April, it says I was going to use just under 12 hours, and now I'm going to need 33 hours according to the schedule. And I can start comparing and looking at these things and saying, now that this is the reality on the ground, now that I have more detail, this is what I have to deal with and possibly adjust my assumptions moving forward. And once again, you can look at it from both of these perspectives at any given point in time. Now, I mentioned that this all rolls up to an overall work plan. So a resource plan. So if I go to a more global resource plan, this is where I can see the overall, and I can view this in a variety of ways, filtered, grouped, et cetera. This one's grouped by business unit. So let's just say I want to focus on product development here, and I can see the different generic and named individuals that I have in here from a resource allocation perspective. And this demo environment, I've got a ton of, insanely over allocated types of resources to show this. But why is that? Well, if I drill into Jack Barker here, right, you can see that there's a lot of challenges, but you can see it's because I've got him on a ton of projects over all these different periods of time. And if I really want to look at this and boil this down to an FTE perspective, you can see that I've got it almost 2.5 times, over 3 times, 1.5 times, 4 times allocated in here. Now, I would submit to you that if I had the visibility of this all the time as I'm going to allocate, I would not have gotten it into this situation to begin with if I had the visibility at the time I was giving him yet more work. So that would be helpful not to be able to do that. Once again, from this same place, if I wanted to get, say, Jack off of VoIP phones, I could say, let me highlight that project and let me look for candidates and to replace, excuse me, I didn't select. It looks like Wolfat is still a good candidate, but Steve Masters is also a candidate in this time frame to take on this, third of an FTE in this particular month to take that off his plate, where I could actually select a particular resource and then replace that resource with that and decrement from their remaining availability down here. The same thing would hold true here from a global perspective on the scheduled, just like we showed you within the work plan. From the bottoms up, with the individual work items rolling up to that scheduled view, if I come in here and look at Jack Barker's bottom up, and I look at that VoIP phones, I can see specifically the task that he's on that we'd be taking him off of. So it's basically rolling this up from the bottom up to give us that allocation as opposed to that top-down approach we looked at with the committed. Now, I talked about resource reports, and resource reports are part of the mix here. If I go here, we leverage Power BI for our reports, and we have a native feed that feeds the OnePlan data to these reports without you having to set up any other connections. In this particular case, a resource dashboard, we give you a number of reports out of the box, but this highlights who the most abused or overused resources are that we have. It gives me an idea of the resources by role and how they're stacked in any given month, looking how we're on demand versus availability by the different roles that we have. And I could particularly focus, I could say, let me just do this for the business analyst role and see what that looks like. I could possibly look at all the roles and maybe focus down to a specific resource and get down to, say, Adam Barr and see what he's assigned to, and get down to those types of things. So for the non-OnePlan user, a report interface to get this particular information might be all they need. Now, if we go back to the portfolio, we talked about what if scenarios and the ability to take a look at a portfolio and prioritize. Now, in the portfolio in OnePlan today, we have the ability to go into, say, a prioritization view, and you can model your own prioritization mechanism in here. And I'm just going to show one example in here in this prioritization view. And this one's kind of more business driver oriented. We say, how well does this strategically align? And it says it has strong alignment. Is it going to lower cost in the organization? It has an extreme alignment to that, but you might have other choices that you could pick from. Does it improve employee retention? Does it provide risk reduction? And what we select in these different gradations will drive a prioritization score with a calculated formula based upon this. So if you have a method you use today, we can easily implement that in your calculation right here into OnePlan. But on top of the straight up calculation and the ranking based on prioritization, we can do our own forced ranking just using that prioritization as a guidepost. So for example, if I go into a prioritization mode, notice that there's a prioritization ranking number here on the left. And for example, if I have a lower priority project that I think should be higher, and I have the rights to do this, I can drag this up and force it up in the rank should I want to or need to, in order to have a forced rank for my projects as I go look at some maybe scenarios of what it's going to take to do these things. Now, with that forced ranking, right, I can look at what it's going to take to do all these projects that are in here. And I could easily do that by interjecting that resource view down below. In this particular case, I can see with the boxes all checked of the projects I'm going to do, it doesn't look like I have a good chance of having the resourcing available with the over allocations I have to successfully accomplish this plan with what I have. Now, we'll talk about a little more what if modeling, but for example, by not doing a particular couple projects and maybe reducing and getting more green into the particular grid down below might be possible. Or up above here where I look at maybe taking a proposed project and say maybe what we do is we can't do it, we do want to do it, but maybe we want to delay it. That will also update what's down below here to give us an idea between selection and timing, what might be a good alternative to us. And remember, I have a very insanely over-allocated model here to begin with. So those types of things can be done and evaluated, and scenarios can be saved as we do this. Now, we're doing this today in the portfolio, but what OnePlan has come up with is a new modeler capability that takes this another step further. If I go into the modeler, instead of having an overall portfolio, I can segment this and, for example, do departmental what ifs or different organizational what ifs or organization based what ifs based on any other type of segmentation of projects that you might want to do. And if I go look at that, it's not a ton different in what you can do, but it allows you to have more flexibility in the way that you analyze. So if I drill into this IT 2022 planning model, we might have different scenarios. So for example, if I went and did all the projects, there would be 107 projects that would be in the portfolio if I did them all, and they're all checked. But I selected a bunch of projects and I ran a scenario that says, what if I had a constraint of a $20 million budget? And in that constraint of that $20 million budget, after the analysis that I did on that, it basically said I can only do 77 of those projects, and these other projects are going to be out, depending on whether they be prioritized, whether they be forced ranking, whatever it might be, however I decided on that. But I saved this scenario based upon the values that we had and had a budget that came in here under the $20 million constraint. Now, I might have also ran a $25 million budget and said, what if I could get another $5 million? And in that scenario, as I look at it, I'm now up to 94 projects that I can do. And I have much fewer projects that don't have to be put on hold or deferred in order to get that done for that $5 million. Now, in and out is different. The resources that we would look at, like we looked at before, right, gives us a picture of what it would take to do that. We could look at the picture of the financials of what the dollars is it's going to take to do that. Or we can look at a comparison between all the scenarios we would have saved, and we can save as many scenarios as we want here. I just happen to have two here. So let's say I'm in the $25 million budget, but I want to analyze and compare. So the targets I set in these scenarios, in this current target, I set a target budget of 25 million. The total budget of what's in this portfolio is now just under 24 million. It has a targeted committed effort of 125,000 hours. This is going to take 128,000 hours, which is more than we thought. But the target benefits of $50 million has been achieved and exceeded to $52 million with this $25 million target. So if you look at the $25 million scenario, we've got $24 million in the budget. We've got 127,000 hours, which is a bit more than less than we targeted. But notice the difference between the $20 million budget, where we're going to derive $43 million in benefit, where for another $5 million, we're going to get another $10 million, another $10.2 million of benefit, meaning it might be worth it for us to find that $5 million to achieve this benefit or value for the organization. So the key is that we can run through these and then look at the details around the different scenarios as we go through as well. So once again, we can do a lot of scenario modeling with this, including resource and financial dimensions of this as we assess. So with that, I'd like to go back to summarize for you and provide some possible next steps. So we talked about how resource management is a critical success factor for PPM success overall, that the approach and processes should align with your organizational readiness and maturity to be successful at this, and you can always grow into further maturity. High-level capacity planning is a good place to start. More detailed resource allocation can follow as ready or as needed. And then OnePlan really does provide a great platform for all the PPM capabilities that support resource management or that support overall project and portfolio management. And OnePlan can also extend existing solutions to provide enhanced visual planning and capabilities. We talked about bringing in data from other tools like Project or Azure DevOps, et cetera. And OnePlan also enhances all the aspects of top-down strategic planning and analysis, whether it be financials, whether it be overall portfolio management, et cetera. And it is built for the Microsoft Cloud and fully integrated. So if you're a Microsoft shop, it's tailor-made for you. Now, next steps. One is, I'd say, assess your readiness. Be honest with yourself about where you're at in your ability to tackle some of these things. But also know that a tool like OnePlan can enable you to get further than you are today, and then set you on the path to where you want to be. Understand your resource management maturity, and just really level with yourself as what are we able to sustain today. And then understand any limitations you have or opportunities you might have given your culture and your environment. Everyone's different. But then build a resource management roadmap. What do you want to accomplish first versus where do you aspire to get to? And let's build a plan to get you there and develop a practical action plan to get to the next maturity level incrementally. But I would say this, let's define your process first and then automate it in a tool like OnePlan. The idea is, we want to have a process and we want to automate that rather than try to automate something that doesn't exist yet. Now, OnePlan does this because this is our passion. We do webinars like this all the time, and we focus on project and portfolio management. We're not a general systems integrator. We really have a passion for this. As a matter of fact, Microsoft has named us 3 of the last 4 years their project and portfolio management global partner of the year. And the 1 year we did not get it, we were actually the finalist or the runner-up. And the analysts like Gartner, Infotech Research, and others are recognizing us for the work that we did. And we were just awarded this partner of the year by Microsoft again in 2022. Now, we do webinars like this all the time. Here's a couple we have planned. We got a couple more I think we're going to do in November and December. But what we have on the docket right now, if you go to oneplan.ai/webinars, is on November 10th, we're going to do program and project financial management in an adaptive project and portfolio management world. So focus a little bit more on the financial side of things. And then we're doing as part of Microsoft's webinar series, we're doing lessons learned from customers using Project for the Web, Accelerator, and OnePlan. So there's some things that we're doing jointly with Microsoft that people are getting value from as well. So please check us out. Now, if you want to try some of this stuff, we do offer free trials of OnePlan. And I would recommend that you try that strategic portfolio management one that you see on the top. When you go to our trial site, you can go to AppSource on Microsoft, appsource.com, and you can just search for OnePlan. And if you find strategic portfolio management, it's our most fully functional one that has the most capabilities. And if you want to try the breadth of capabilities, I suggest you start there. We can also, if you're not ready to get hands-on, just have a discussion with you, give you a free roadmap workshop to discuss where you're at, what your current requirements and what maybe your desired future state is, and determine how to implement or migrate into the new solution. We can give you a roadmap of what it's going to take and even a cost of what's there. Because we're built for the Microsoft Cloud and leverage a lot of Microsoft tools, you may already own a chunk of what you need. So we're happy to have that discussion with you on a complimentary basis. So the free trial, we'd love to help you with that too. So don't be bashful about reaching out. We can chaperone you to make sure you get the most value out of that trial. The roadmap workshop we talked about. Or if you're not ready for either of those things and you want more than the generalized demo I gave you today, we can do a more personalized one-on-one demo to target some of the things and requirements that you have and the use cases that you'd like to see. If you'd like to do that, just contact us at contact@oneplan.ai. Or you can research more about us at www.oneplan.ai. So once again, I'd like to thank you for spending time in your valuable day. Hope you got some value out of the material today. As an organization, we like to say we're invested in success, and by that we mean we're invested in your success, our customer success. Check us out at our website. Feel free to reach out to me directly if you'd like to. You'll get a copy of these slides and a link to the recording, as Robert said earlier on. Thank you and have a great day.